Prologue. When the history of the gods has not truly ended. The Titanomachy, the legendary war that shattered the old cosmos and crowned the Olympians as its new rulers, has long been remembered
If
as the
victory
final
means
chapter
restoring
in
the
Age of
ancient
Titans.
world of
A war
primordial
so
dominance.
absolute, so devastating, that even the immortals themselves believed no echo of it could ever return. But history, especially divine history, is never truly finished. Deep beneath the roots of the world, where light dissolves into silence, and even memory dares not linger, the chains of Tartarus continue to tremble, not from the rage of monsters, nor from the prayers of mortals, but from something far more dangerous, awakening. The Titans were never merely defeated. They were buried within the very foundations of reality. Time, ocean, light, and cosmic order were not erased when Cronus fell. They were sealed, compressed, and forced into slumber beneath a new regime of gods who learned to rule not through raw force, but through
Yet
structure,
every system built upon
law,
suppression eventually faces the
Yet
same
every
question.
system built upon
What
suppression
happens when
eventually faces the
their
same
realms
question.
were never
What happens when
meant
the
to
powers
collide?
that shape the universe
Yet
before
imagine a
law
moment when
and
the
civilization
borders between
begin
myths
to remember who they were? If the Titans rise again, this will not be a war of thrones or territory. It will be a war over existence itself, over which vision of the cosmos deserves to endure. The Olympians represent continuity, balance, and a world refined enough to sustain both gods and mortals. The Titans embody origin, unfiltered creation, merciless cycles, and the terrifying purity of natural authority. And somewhere between the thunder of Zeus and the silent pulse of ancient time, a second war quietly prepares to be written. Because the true danger is not that the Titans may return. The true danger is that the world they once ruled
One
may
is
still
Zeus
be
of
waiting
Greek
for them.
mythology, the supreme god whose thunder shaped the laws of
Part
heaven
1.
and earth, the
Titans,
ruler acknowledged by
primordial
fate
power
itself.
and the wrath of a lost age. If the Titans were to rise again, they would not return as conquerors seeking a throne. They would return as a correction. In the mythology of the ancient world, the Titans were never merely predecessors of the Olympian gods. They were the architecture of existence itself. Vast, impersonal forces that shaped reality before the idea of justice, order, or divine politics had ever taken form. To speak of a second Titan war is not to imagine another battlefield beneath a storm-filled sky, but to imagine the universe itself resisting the rules that now govern it. The Olympians rule a world that has learned how to function. The Titans once ruled a world that had not yet learned how to survive. That difference defines everything. The Titans are not gods. They are conditions of existence.
For ages
Zeus
beyond
hurls
mortal
lightning.
memory,
Poseidon commands
Olympus
the
has
sea.
stood
Hades
unchallenged.
governs the dead. But Cronus does not merely rule time. He is the terror of succession itself. Oceanus is not simply lord of water. He is the endless circulation of energy and matter through the world's veins. Hyperion is not sunlight. He is illumination before language learned how to name light. Zeus embodies the axis of cosmic intelligence, the invisible logic that binds space, thought, and structure together. Iapetus carries the burden of mortality and limitation. Crius anchors the cardinal directions and the orientation of the cosmos. The Olympians, for all their power, are recognizable. The Titans are not. They are closer to physical law than to personality. This is why their return would not resemble an invasion. It would resemble a planetary malfunction. The First War taught them the wrong lesson. In the original Titanomachy, the Titans fought as sovereigns defending a fading order. Cronus, blinded by fear of prophecy, relied on domination rather than adaptability. He believed that absolute power could erase the uncertainty of the future. His rule was not chaotic, it was stagnant. The Titans lost not because they were weaker, but because they were unprepared for something that had never existed before. A coalition of specialized powers bound by strategy. Zeus did not overthrow his father by matching him blow for blow. He rewrote how divine conflict could be organized. He distributed authority. He weaponized cooperation. He turned difference into advantage. From the Titan perspective, The defeat was incomprehensible. They did not lose a war. They lost relevance. And that humiliation would define their thinking if they were ever to return. In a second war, the Titans would not attack Olympus. They would attack the world that sustains Olympus. The greatest mistake is to imagine the Titans marching toward Mount Olympus like an ancient army. They would not need to. A modern Olympus, an Olympus that depends on stable cycles, predictable realms, and interconnected divine functions, cannot survive if the underlying mechanics of reality begin to unravel. The Titan's true battlefield would be invisible. Oceanus would not flood cities. He would corrupt circulation. In a fictional reconstruction of the Second War, Oceanus might destabilize the metaphysical rivers that carry divine energy between realms. The flow sustaining healing, resurrection, and regeneration would fracture. Gods who once recovered from fatal wounds would find their immortality delayed, distorted, unreliable. Hyperion would not burn armies. He would disrupt the primal light that regulates cosmic rhythm. Seasons would detach from astronomical logic. Day and night would bleed into each other. Crops would fail not from drought or frost, but from temporal dissonance. Growth would lose synchronization with the world. Zeus would become far more dangerous than any warrior. He would attack cognition itself. Prophetic sight would collapse into contradiction. Strategic foresight would fracture into infinite outcomes without hierarchy. The Olympian advantage of prediction, Apollo's visions, Athena's modeling of future conflict, would degrade into statistical noise. And Cronus would never step onto the battlefield. Not at first. He would strike at continuity. In this imagined second Titan uprising, Cronus could fragment time into overlapping strata, creating pockets of accelerated decay and suspended causality. Communication between realms would fail because events would no longer share the same temporal reference frame. An order built upon coordination collapses the moment coordination becomes impossible. The Titans would not destroy Olympus. They would make Olympus unworkable. Why this strategy terrifies the Olympians. Olympian power evolved within stability. Even chaos gods among them, Ares, Dionysus, Eris, operate inside an overarching system that defines space, time, memory, and identity. The Titans are older than that system. They remember how reality behaved before governance existed. The greatest nightmare for Zeus is not defeat. It is a world in which victory has no operational meaning. If laws of interaction erode, if cause no longer reliably produces effect, then leadership becomes symbolic. Authority becomes ceremonial. The Titans do not need to overthrow Zeus. They only need to ensure that no ruler can function. The psychological advantage of the Titans, memory of a forgotten cosmos. The Olympians inherited the world. The Titans created the environment in which the world became possible. That distinction carries a dangerous psychological weight. A Titan does not experience loss the way a god does. A god loses territory. A Titan loses relevance. And relevance, to a primordial being, is survival. In a fictionalized second war, the Titans would be driven by something far colder than vengeance, existential correction. They would not seek to punish Zeus. They would seek to undo the premise that made Zeus necessary. Cronus, reimagined as the architect of collapse. In the popular imagination, Cronus is remembered as a paranoid tyrant who devoured his own children. In a second Titan war, he would be something far more dangerous, a strategist of inevitability. Rather than commanding his kin through fear, Cronus would understand the failure of centralized domination. His new role would be minimal, precise, and devastating. He would not issue commands. He would define parameters. Cronus would orchestrate temporal pressure points across reality, locations and moments where probability converges. At these nodes, Olympian intervention would consistently arrive either too early or too late. Battles would be lost, not because the gods fought poorly, but because they arrived at the wrong version of the present. Even Athena's adaptive planning would falter when the past itself becomes unreliable. The Titans do not need unity. They only need synchronization. One of the traditional weaknesses of the Titans has always been their lack of political cohesion. They're not natural collaborators. Their power structures were vertical and rigid. Each Titan embodied a domain so fundamental that negotiation felt unnecessary. In a second war, that weakness becomes irrelevant. They would not coordinate through hierarchy. They would synchronize through necessity. Oceanus destabilizes flow. Hyperion destabilizes rhythm. Zeus destabilizes cognition. Cronus destabilizes continuity. These actions do not require conversation. They require alignment. In effect, the Titans would function less like an army and more like a distributed system failure. The true horror: the Titans do not care who survives. The Olympians fight for a world that includes mortals, heroes, cultures, memory, worship, and legacy. The Titans never built civilizations. They do not draw strength from belief. They are not dependent on narrative. If entire continents collapse into uninhabitable metaphysical wastelands, the Titans would not perceive tragedy. They would perceive reconfiguration. This emotional asymmetry creates an enormous strategic imbalance. The Olympians must protect. The Titans must only restore. A fictional turning point: the silence of oracles. In the early phase of the Second War, one event becomes the first undeniable sign that the Titans have returned. Across all prophetic channels, Delphi, the sacred fires of Apollo, the dream vaults of Hypnos, visions fail simultaneously. Not because the future is hidden, but because the future no longer converges. Zeus has collapsed the epistemic spine of reality. Every possible outcome remains technically accessible, but none are statistically dominant. The Olympians lose the ability to distinguish signal from cosmic background noise. This moment is remembered by later scholars of the war as the silence of oracles. From that point forward, Olympus fights blind. The erosion of divine logistics. Hermes' speed becomes meaningless when distance itself loses consistency. Hades' borders fracture when the metaphysical rivers that separate life and death no longer flow in one direction. Poseidon's oceans turn unpredictable, not in storm, but in topology. Depths collapse into impossible geometries. Naval divine forces vanish into folds of spatial water that no longer map onto the surface world. Even Hephaestus, the master of divine engineering, cannot stabilize weapons when the materials themselves lose coherence under Hyperion's destabilized light. Technology presumes stable reality. The Titans attack that presumption. The hidden weakness of the Titans: rigidity disguised as inevitability. And yet, despite the overwhelming terror of their approach, the Titans still carry a flaw embedded in their very nature. They cannot truly innovate. They are expressions of primordial configuration. Their domains are fixed. Oceanus cannot become something other than flow. Hyperion cannot redefine illumination. Zeus cannot abandon structure for intuition. Cronus cannot escape the logic of succession and decay. They can modify parameters. They cannot invent new paradigms. The Olympians, by contrast, are creatures of adaptation. Their domains overlap. Their identities evolve. Ares becomes both destruction and discipline. Athena shifts from battlefield strategy to civil governance. Apollo transitions between plague and healing, destruction and harmony. They can modify parameters. They cannot invent new paradigms. The Olympians, by contrast, are creatures of adaptation. Their domains overlap. Their identities evolve. Ares becomes both destruction and discipline. Athena shifts from battlefield strategy to civil governance. Apollo transitions between plague and healing, destruction and harmony. In a prolonged conflict, this difference becomes decisive. The Titans can destabilize, but they struggle to construct a sustainable alternative order. The deeper problem: the Titans cannot imagine a future that includes Olympians. This is not hatred. It is incompatibility. The Titans come from a cosmology where governance was unnecessary because scale eliminated dissent. The universe was too vast, too young, too unstructured for politics to matter. The Olympians represent an evolved cosmology, one where interactions are dense, consequences ripple through interdependent systems, and leadership exists because chaos has become expensive. The Titans cannot integrate that complexity into their worldview. They do not understand coexistence, only replacement, a fictional fracture within the Titans themselves. Not all Titans would share Cronus' vision. In the imagined Second War, subtle fractures would appear among the younger Titans. Those who had, across millennia of imprisonment, learned indirectly from the gods who replaced them. Some would begin to perceive that destabilizing reality does not restore the old world. It creates something far more volatile. A proto-schism emerges, not ideological in the mortal sense, but functional. Certain Titans hesitate to push their domains beyond thresholds that would trigger irreversible cosmic collapse. This hesitation is not mercy. It is self-preservation. If reality disintegrates too far, even primordial entities lose anchoring. Total entropy erases identity. Even Titans are not immune to meaninglessness. The unspoken fear among the Titans. The Titans remember a universe without worship, without prayer, without narrative continuity, without mortals. They existed, but they were not remembered. The Olympians, for all their political complexity, are embedded into the story of existence itself. Every human myth, every heroic saga, every temple reinforces the ontological stability of the Olympian order. The Titans lack that reinforcement. In a paradoxical way, their greatest strength, their independence from belief, also isolates them. They are not woven into memory. They are buried beneath it. The silent realization of Zeus. At the earliest strategic council, following the silence of oracles, Zeus confronts a truth no god wishes to articulate. This war cannot be won by overpowering the Titans, because there is no central enemy to defeat. There is only a distributed regression of reality. To fight the Titans directly would be to attack symptoms, not causes. And yet, for all their terror, Zeus also recognizes the hidden boundary of their power. The Titans can unravel, but they cannot govern what follows. Why the Titans remain the most terrifying force in any second war. The Titans represent something the Olympians can never truly become again. The authority of origin. They do not need legitimacy. They do not need consensus. They do not need moral justification. Their power does not persuade. It replaces. In the opening stage of a Second Titan War, the Titans would dominate not through spectacle, but through structural erosion. Entire divine systems would fail without a single decisive battle. The gods would find themselves fighting emergencies rather than enemies. And for a time, perhaps a long and brutal time, the Titans would appear unstoppable, not because they are stronger than the Olympians, but because they are older than the very rules the Olympians depend on to survive. Yet buried within that terrifying advantage lies the seed of their ultimate limitation. They know how the world once worked. They do not truly understand the world that now exists. And in that gap between origin and evolution, the fate of the Second War quietly begins to take shape. Part 2, Olympians, the power of adaptation and alliance. If the Titans embody the authority of origin, then the Olympians embody something far more fragile and far more dangerous. They embody continuity. They are not the architects of the universe. They are its administrators, its engineers, its diplomats, its guardians, and, when necessary, its executioners. They rule not because reality bends naturally to them, but because they have learned how to operate a world that is already densely interconnected, politically unstable, and metaphysically delicate. In a second war against the Titans, the Olympians would not attempt to restore the heroic imagery of the first Titanomachy. There would be no single battlefield, no dramatic clash of thunder and stone before cheering immortals. Instead, the Olympian response would unfold as a multi-layered, adaptive system of containment, denial, and strategic reconfiguration. This is not the story of gods who are stronger than their enemies. It is the story of gods who are better prepared for complexity. Olympus is not a throne. It is a network. The Titans once ruled through scale and inevitability. The Olympians rule through coordination. Mount Olympus functions less like a royal court and more like a living command architecture, an interdependent web of specialized authorities whose domains overlap, reinforce, and correct one another. Zeus stands at the center, not as an omnipotent monarch, but as a stabilizing force, a regulator of divine escalation. His lightning is not merely destructive. It is corrective, capable of restoring equilibrium in unstable energetic zones, sealing rifts in divine causality, and suppressing runaway manifestations of power. Athena does not simply plan wars. She models systems. She studies failure patterns. She predicts cascading consequences in political, mortal, and divine layers simultaneously. Apollo governs information, not only prophecy, but rhythm, synchronization, and cultural continuity. His influence shapes how truth propagates across civilizations. Hermes is the logistical spine of Olympus. Speed, translation, boundary crossing, and rapid response coordination all converge through him. Hephaestus translates strategy into hardware, containment arrays, divine interfaces, adaptive weapons, and reality-stabilizing constructs. Poseidon governs fluid domains, both literal oceans and the mutable frontiers between realms. Hades secures the terminal boundary of existence, death, memory, and ontological finality. This structure is not elegant. It is resilient. The Olympian advantage, operational interoperability. The Titans act through domain purity. The Olympians act through domain overlap. Athena can integrate Apollo's probabilistic forecasts into battlefield decision matrices. Hermes can transport Hephaestus constructs through unstable dimensional corridors. Hades can anchor containment zones that Zeus energizes and Poseidon shields from spatial collapse. Their powers were shaped by centuries of cooperative crisis management. Giant wars, monster incursions, mortal uprisings, divine rebellions, and interpanthean conflicts. In a second war, that accumulated institutional memory becomes their greatest weapon. The Olympians are not merely powerful. They are operational. The moment Olympus understands the nature of the Second War, the silence of oracles does not create panic. It creates a paradigm shift. When Apollo confirms that prophetic collapse is not obstruction, but systemic divergence, Olympus abandons any hope of predictive supremacy. Instead, Athena proposes a doctrinal transformation known later as the doctrine of reactive sovereignty. The gods accept that they cannot foresee the future. They must become faster than it. Adaptive warfare in a collapsing reality. Olympian combat doctrine in the Second War would no longer revolve around decisive engagement. It would revolve around damage containment. When Oceanus destabilizes divine circulation, Hephaestus deploys modular reality conduits, temporary energy bypasses that reroute divine flow through artificial metaphysical channels. When Hyperion fractures cosmic rhythm, Apollo and Artemis synchronize mortal and divine cycles through artificial harmonic anchors, preserving at least local continuity. When Zeus corrupts cognition and foresight, Athena institutes decentralized decision protocols, local command autonomy granted to demigods, regional gods, and heroic commanders. The Olympians stop fighting as a centralized hierarchy. They become a distributed crisis network. Hermes and the War of Mobility. In a universe where distance loses consistency, mobility becomes a strategic weapon. Hermes does not merely run. He recalibrates movement itself. By embedding micro-anchors of fixed spatial reference into transit corridors, Hermes creates temporary, safe paths through distorted topology. These paths allow Olympian forces to deploy faster than Titans can adjust domain disruptions. This grants Olympus a critical, if fragile, advantage. They can still reach places where the Titans assume access is impossible. Hades and the preservation of boundaries. The Titans erode borders. Hades rebuilds them. As metaphysical rivers collapse and death loses directional flow, Hades establishes necrotic anchor zones, localized regions where ontological finality is enforced. Nothing trapped within these zones can revert, regenerate, or escape into causal loops. This allows Olympus to isolate Titan manifestations that have been partially forced into divine form, preventing them from reintegrating into their primordial domains. Hades becomes not the lord of the dead, but the guardian of irreversible consequence. The political layer of Olympian warfare. The Titans do not negotiate. The Olympians must. A second Titan war unfolds across pantheons. Norse, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and Eastern divine systems cannot remain neutral when reality destabilizes. Athena and Hera activate ancient diplomatic channels. Zeus offers sovereignty pacts, mutual non-interference zones, shared containment infrastructures, and cooperative defense treaties. The Titans' indifference to belief becomes their diplomatic weakness. Olympus, embedded in worship networks and cultural mythologies, can mobilize divine legitimacy. The war becomes global, not mythically, administratively. The fictional keystone, the Lori-writing rite of Athena. In a sealed chamber beneath Olympus, Athena activates a forbidden relic forged from the skeletal memory of Gaia. The rite does not grant power. It grants jurisdiction. Within a controlled operational theater known as the Aegis Field, primordial entities are subjected to interpretive compression. Their domains are not removed. They are translated. A Titan manifestation entering the Aegis Field is forced to resolve into a discrete identity, a bounded divine entity rather than an environmental condition. In essence, the Titans are dragged onto the Olympian battlefield. For the first time since creation, a Titan can be wounded in a way that matters. The cost of law manipulation. The Aegis Field destabilizes reality wherever it expands. Every activation risks permanent metaphysical scarring. Athena understands the implication. Olympus can save the world, but it may render parts of it unusable. The Olympians are not defending perfection. They're choosing survivability. Zeus and the ethics of escalation. Zeus confronts a dilemma his father never faced. Cronus ruled through inevitability. Zeus must rule through restraint. Each expansion of the Aegis Field strengthens Olympian tactical capacity, but simultaneously erodes the legitimacy of natural order. If Olympus rewrites too many local laws, the Titans will not need to destroy the world. Olympus will. Zeus becomes the arbiter of acceptable damage, a god of thunder forced into the role of risk governor. Poseidon and the war of mutable frontiers. Poseidon's domain becomes one of the most strategically vital. The oceans now behave as semi-dimensional membranes. Beneath their surfaces lie access corridors to fractured realities, Titan-infested substrata, and submerged causal faults. Poseidon deploys abyssal sentinels, ancient sea constructs capable of stabilizing depth topology. His war is not fought on waves. It is fought on the geometry of descent. Hephaestus and adaptive divine technology. Weapons designed to kill no longer suffice. Hephaestus engineers containment artifacts capable of locking probabilistic states, enforcing localized causality, stabilizing collapsing identities. These are not tools of destruction. They are tools of definition. The Olympians stop trying to overpower Titans. They try to classify them. The Olympian weapon, narrative coherence. A hidden advantage lies beyond raw strategy. The Olympians exist within story. Heroes rise. Sacrifices matter. Victories are remembered. The Titans exist outside narrative causality. This becomes exploitable. Apollo, the Muses, and Athena coordinate a vast myth stabilization initiative. Mortal cultures are unconsciously guided toward renewed mythic focus on Olympian continuity. Temples are restored. Legends are reactivated. Collective memory becomes a subtle reinforcement of Olympian ontological stability. The Titans, lacking worship structures, cannot benefit from this narrative amplification. The psychological warfare of identity. The Aegis Field does more than constrain power. It forces self-reference. A Titan compressed into an individualized manifestation must perceive itself as a subject rather than an environment. For beings defined by function rather than selfhood, this shift is deeply destabilizing. Some Titan manifestations begin to fracture, not physically, conceptually. Identity becomes a wound, a fragile alliance of gods and mortals. Demigods and heroic lineages are mobilized, not as expendable soldiers, as adaptive agents. Mortals are unpredictable. They innovate. They reinterpret divine instruction. Athena deliberately empowers human commanders in localized defense theaters, accepting inefficiency in exchange for creativity. The Titans cannot anticipate improvisation. They respond to systemic behavior. Humans introducen noise. In a system war, noise becomes resistance. The shadow of Hestia. While war rages across collapsing skies and fractured seas, Hestia maintains the hearth of Olympus. Her domain, home, continuity, presence, anchors the gods themselves. As Titan interference erodes divine identity, Hestia's quiet influence stabilizes the Olympians' internal coherence. Without her, coordination would collapse into personal vendetta and fractured agendas. The most fragile goddess becomes the structural glue of war. The greatest Olympian vulnerability. For all their sophistication, the Olympians carry a fatal constraint. They must care. Every strategic decision is burdened by consequence. Mortal casualties, cultural collapse, ecological devastation, political fallout. The Titans are not constrained by grief. The Olympians are. Every life saved slows their response. Every city protected drains resources. This asymmetry is never resolved. It is only managed. The silent emergence of a new doctrine. As the Second War stretches into its most unstable phase, Athena proposes an unthinkable contingency. The doctrine of transfiguration. Rather than imprison Titans, Olympus will attempt to re-encode primordial domains into subordinate cosmic functions, integrated into Olympian governance structures. Not defeat, assimilation. A Titan of flow becomes a managed inter-realm transit authority. A Titan of rhythm becomes a stabilized cosmic regulator. This is not mercy. It is systemic absorption, the moral fracture of Olympus. Not all gods agree. Ares calls it cowardice. Hera fears the political chaos. Hades warns of irreversible ontological debt. But Zeus sees what the Titans cannot. The future will not survive replacement, only integration. Why the Olympians remain humanity's only viable guardians. The Olympians are flawed. They are political. They are inconsistent. They argue. They fail. But they are shaped by the same fundamental condition as mortals. They must live with what comes after. The Titans do not recognize aftermath. Part 3. The decisive scenario. Who would win if the war began again? A second war between the Titans and the Olympians would not end in a single, legendary confrontation. There would be no battlefield worthy of poetry. No final duel between father and son beneath a burning sky. Instead, the war would conclude the way system-level catastrophes always do, quietly, unevenly, and with a reality that never quite returns to what it once was. The question, who would win, is therefore not a matter of power. It is a matter of survivability. It is a matter of which side can still function when the universe itself begins to fail. The false premise of victory. From the very beginning, both sides would realize, long before mortals ever sensed the scale of the disaster, that this war could not be measured in conquered territory or defeated enemies. The Titans cannot be conquered in the traditional sense. The Olympians cannot afford to lose in the traditional sense. Victory, in this war, is defined by a single criterion. Who still possesses a governable world at the end? Not a perfect world, not a just world, a usable one. Phase 1, the age of unraveling. In the opening phase of the Second War, the advantage belongs unmistakably to the Titans. Not because they strike harder, but because they strike deeper. Across multiple planes of reality, simultaneous failures begin to cascade. Causality desynchronizes. Distance becomes probabilistic. Memory fractures. The divine infrastructure that quietly supports civilization, harvest cycles, weather stabilization, border integrity between life and death, interrealm transit, begins to degrade. From the perspective of mortals, the collapse is gradual. From the perspective of Olympus, it is immediate. Emergency councils convene daily. Hermes transit corridors fail faster than Hephaestus can reinforce them. Apollo's harmonic anchors stabilize one region only to cause distortions in another. Hades reports unprecedented leakage of incomplete souls, entities unable to finalize death because temporal continuity no longer holds. In this phase, the Olympians are not fighting the Titans. They are fighting entropy wearing the Titan's signatures. The Titans remain largely invisible. Oceanus destabilizes flow at planetary scale. Hyperion fractures the coherence of illumination. Zeus erodes cognitive certainty. Cronus disrupts succession itself, political, biological, and temporal. The Olympians do not yet know where to strike. They only know what is breaking. This is the Titans' ideal battlefield. A battlefield with no front lines. Why the Titans dominate early. The Titans possess three decisive advantages in this phase. 1. Asymmetry of obligation. They do not protect infrastructure. They dismantle it. 2. Asymmetry of perception. They experience reality as manipulable parameters, not as lived environments. 3. Asymmetry of consequence. Every Olympian intervention risks collateral damage. Every Titan intervention is collateral damage. The first months of the Second War are therefore remembered among later divine chroniclers as the era of firefighting. Olympus spends nearly all its strategic capacity preventing total systemic collapse, not defeating enemies, just keeping the lights on. 2. Phase 2. The reassertion of structure. The turning point does not come through force. It comes through architecture. The Olympians finally accept a truth Athena had articulated since the silence of oracles. The Titans cannot be outmatched. They must be recontextualized. The Aegis Field program expands from experimental theaters into a planetary containment lattice. Across key instability nodes, Athena activates overlapping law compression zones. Inside these regions, Titan manifestations are no longer free-form environmental disruptions. They must resolve into bounded operational entities. They become targetable. This marks the first time in the Second War that Olympus can conduct something resembling an offensive. Localized victories, and why they are dangerous. Within Aegis zones, Olympian strike teams succeed. Zeus suppresses destabilized storm strata. Poseidon collapses abyssal folds. Hades locks fractured identity fragments into terminal anchors. Demigod units, supported by Hermes corridor networks, eliminate Titan-spawned anomalies. For the first time since the war began, Olympus gains ground. But the price is immediate and terrifying. Reality inside and around Aegis zones becomes brittle. Natural processes stutter. Creatures born within compressed law regions exhibit unstable identities. Memory behaves erratically. Olympus is learning how to fight, but it is also learning how to scar the universe. The Titans adapt within their limits. The Titans cannot innovate in the Olympian sense, but they can shift emphasis. When direct environmental disruption becomes partially containable, they retreat from high-density regions and refocus on transitional domains. Interrealm boundary, liminal temporal zone, deep structure cognitive fields, underworld transit layers. Their strategy changes from destabilizing the surface of reality to corroding its joints. Olympus finds itself protecting not cities or skies, but concepts. The meaning of death, the continuity of identity, the reliability of memory, the persistence of promise. These are not things Zeus can strike with lightning. 3. Phase 3. The War of Governance. At this stage, the Second War becomes something unprecedented. It stops being a war of survival. It becomes a war over administration. The Olympians realize that defeating Titan manifestations is insufficient. Every sealed rupture reopens elsewhere. Every stabilized zone creates pressure gradients that push instability into new regions. The Titans are not an invading army. They are a competing operational logic. The conflict now revolves around a brutal question: who gets to define how reality is allowed to behave? The rise of the Transfiguration Doctrine. Athena formally activates the doctrine of transfiguration. Instead of isolating Titan manifestations indefinitely, Olympus begins selective re-encoding. Within stabilized Aegis fields, certain Titan domains are partially decomposed and integrated into Olympian regulatory frameworks. Flow becomes managed circulation. Rhythm becomes stabilized temporal scheduling. Illumination becomes distributed informational coherence. These Titans are not destroyed. They are absorbed as subordinate cosmic functions. This is not domination. It is systems engineering. Why this terrifies both sides. To the Titans, transfiguration is worse than imprisonment. It strips them of domain purity. It forces their existence to serve an order they did not originate. To the Olympians, transfiguration is existentially dangerous. Every integration expands Olympus' jurisdiction over reality. Every expansion deepens Olympus' responsibility for everything that follows. Power is turning into liability. For the breaking point, Cronus intervenes. Until this stage, Cronus has remained almost completely silent. He has shaped the war through absence, through pressure, through structural interference. But transfiguration crosses a boundary. It threatens the one thing even Titans cannot endure: the erasure of primordial identity. Cronus intervenes, not through destruction, but through recalibration. He creates a cascading temporal inversion across multiple governance layers. In dozens of critical regions, integrated Titan functions suddenly revert, not backward in time, but backward in definition. Systems forget why they exist. Regulatory frameworks lose interpretive authority. Olympian administrators find their own constructs operating under obsolete premises. It is not chaos. It is misalignment. A universe running the wrong version of itself. The paradox of Cronus' power. Cronus does not control time. He controls succession, the inheritance of states, the continuity of authority. When he disrupts temporal governance, he attacks the legitimacy of Olympus interventions. He forces every decision to be questioned by its own earlier logic. Athena's models fracture. Hephaestus' containment arrays begin following deprecated protocols. Hermes' corridors route traffic according to outdated spatial references. Olympus is suddenly forced to fight its own operational history. The hidden variable, mortals. Throughout the Second War, mortals remain largely unaware of the true scale of events. They experience climate anomalies, cultural disorientation, political instability, mass migration, spiritual fragmentation. But they do not perceive Titans. They perceive uncertainty. And in that uncertainty, something unpredictable emerges. Innovation. Mortal societies begin adapting faster than Olympian interventions can anticipate. New mythologies form. Hybrid belief systems stabilize regions where divine governance has fractured. Local narratives replace universal cosmology. This becomes a statistical anomaly Athena cannot ignore. Why mortals matter strategically. Mortals are not bound by domain identity. They can reinterpret meaning. They can adopt contradictions. They can rebuild social and symbolic structures faster than gods can rewrite cosmic law. In regions where Olympian influence weakens and Titan disruption is limited, human institutions begin quietly creating survivable microorders. Not perfect, but resilient. These microorders reduce systemic stress on divine infrastructure. They function as pressure valves. The first unplanned alliance. Athena authorizes unprecedented cooperation with mortal philosophers, engineers, and myth-keepers. Not prophets, not heroes, architects of meaning. Olympus begins feeding them symbolic frameworks rather than commands. The result is a distributed stabilization effect that neither side fully controls. The The Titans do not understand it. They do not perceive belief-driven structure as a force. This becomes a blind spot. 6. The convergence crisis. As transfiguration expands and Cronus succession interference intensifies, reality begins exhibiting convergence instability. Too many operational layers attempt to define the same domains. Natural law, Olympian governance, integrated Titan functions, mortal symbolic structures. These layers interfere. The risk is no longer collapse. It is contradiction. Multiple incompatible realities begin coexisting in adjacent zones. This cannot continue. A universe cannot run competing rule sets indefinitely. Something must give. 7. Zeus' irreversible decision. Zeus realizes that the war has crossed a threshold beyond tactical repair. No combination of containment, transfiguration, or diplomacy will resolve the conflict permanently. As long as primordial authority exists outside Olympian governance, regression will recur. But as long as Olympian governance continues expanding unchecked, reality will harden into a rigid, over-regulated system incapable of organic evolution. Both outcomes are fatal. Zeus makes a decision no ruler of Olympus has ever made. He accepts limitation, the covenant of constraint. In a sealed convergence chamber stabilized by Hades and Athena, Zeus initiates the covenant of constraint. Olympus voluntarily relinquishes permanent jurisdiction over specific domains. Certain transfigured Titan functions are released into autonomous regulatory states. Not Titans, not Olympian gods, independent cosmic regulators. This reduces systemic tension. It introduces neutral governance layers between primordial forces and Olympian administration. It is an act of decentralization. Why this ends the war? The Titans no longer face total absorption. The Olympians no longer face infinite responsibility. The system acquires a buffer. Cronus interference loses leverage. Succession becomes ambiguous. Authority becomes plural. For the first time since the war began, no side holds absolute interpretive control. The conflict de-escalates, not because trust exists, but because escalation becomes strategically unproductive. 8. The final outcome. Who wins? From the Titans' perspective, they fail to restore the world of origin. They fail to erase Olympian governance. They fail to reclaim domain purity. From the Olympians' perspective, they preserve continuity. They prevent systemic collapse. They retain influence, but they surrender absolute authority. So who wins? The honest answer: neither side achieves its original objective, but one side achieves survivability. The Olympians, not because they defeat the Titans, but because they adapt their own identity. The Titans attempt to revert reality. The Olympians transform themselves to coexist with reality's new complexity. That difference decides the war. 9. The deeper victory and its cost. The Olympians emerge weakened, politically fragmented, morally exhausted. Their legitimacy becomes conditional. They are no longer unquestioned rulers. They become stewards, custodians, risk managers of existence. The Titans remain, reduced, dispersed, functionally constrained, but not erased. The war does not end history. It rewrites governance. X. The quiet truth remembered after the war. Long after the Second War fades into legend, one sentence circulates among divine archivists. The Titans taught the gods how fragile reality is. The gods taught the universe how to survive itself. Who would win if the war began again? If victory means restoring the ancient world of primordial dominance, then the Titans would lose. If victory means ruling without limitation, then the Olympians would also lose. But if victory means preserving a future in which the universe can still adapt, evolve, and remain inhabitable, then the side most likely to win is not the one that controls the greatest power. It is the one that learns when to stop using it. And in a second war between Titans and Olympians, only the Olympians are capable of learning that lesson. Conclusion: who would win if the Titan War began again? If we measure victory by raw, overwhelming force, then the Titans would still remain the most terrifying beings the universe has ever produced. Their power does not merely destroy cities or shatter armies. It reshapes the conditions under which reality itself is allowed to exist. Against such primordial authority, even the greatest Olympian gods would appear fragile, constrained by laws, responsibility, and the necessity to preserve a livable world. Yet a second Titan War would not be decided by who can break the universe faster. It will be decided by who can keep it functioning. The Titans carry the memory of a cosmos that existed before governance, before meaning, before the fragile architecture of civilization and belief. They fight to restore an origin that no longer fits the complexity of the present. Their strength lies in erasure, in resetting the world to something simpler, harsher, and infinitely less forgiving. The Olympians, by contrast, are the guardians of an evolved reality. They are imperfect rulers, political, conflicted, and often divided, but they understand interdependence. They understand consequence. Most importantly, they understand that power is no longer about domination, but about responsibility. So if the Titan War were to begin again, the Olympians would not win because they are stronger. They would win because they are willing to change. They would win because they accept limits where the Titans recognize only absolutes. In a universe that has grown too intricate to survive pure, primordial authority, adaptability becomes the ultimate form of power. And in that quiet, difficult, and deeply human lesson, the fate of gods and Titans alike would finally be decided.